Welcome to my madness, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I want to throw my hat in the ring for the Giant Man HASLAB as far as determining whether or not I think it's worth it. Now, to be clear here, I'm not coming at this from a biased perspective. There are groups of people out there you will see on YouTube who hate HASLABs and hate Hasbro and hate crowdfunding, and no matter what you do, no matter what you say, they're going to say it's not worth it. And then there are other groups of people who love Hasbro and love HASLABs and all that stuff, and they're going to say it's worth it no matter what. I've never backed a HASLAB. I've never backed any crowdfunding action figure, period, end of story. Never, not once. Now, that being said, I always consider it. I don't have a problem with crowdfunding. I think it's a little strange that a big company like Hasbro has to crowdfund. But in general, don't have a problem with crowdfunding or anything like that. I've just never backed one before. And at this point, we're about 3 weeks away, give or take, 2 to 3 weeks from the end of this HASLAB. As usual, what I usually do is consider it right up until the last minute. And I still kind of am considering it. But I don't really have a dog in this fight. I just kind of want to go over whether or not I think it's worth it, and that's what I want to talk about here today. So there's really 4 points that I want to go over here to determine whether or not I think the Giant Man HASLAB is worth your money. First up is going to be plastic. Is there $200 worth of plastic for this thing at the $200 price point? And if you look at some pictures that we have here, and you see where it stacks up with, let's say, a standard $25 Marvel Legend, is it worth 8 Marvel Legends as far as plastic goes? And I think when you look at it, you can clearly see there is at least 8 figures worth of plastic to put this thing together. So from just a materials point of view, yes, I do think it's worth it. Now there's the engineering side of things. Is there the equivalent of 8 figures worth of engineering here? And this one's a little kind of misleading because of the fact that if there was actually 8 figures worth of engineering in this one figure, it would be way too articulated and over-engineered. So you really can't have that. But let's look at what they've actually done here, which is essentially give it all the articulation that a standard sized, 6-inch scale Marvel Legend would have, in addition to really going crazy on the hand articulation with all the fingers. So they've bumped up the articulation game by quite a bit. And I think the engineering is appropriate for what it is supposed to be. If done well, which again, we won't know till these things ship and start showing up to people. If done well, I think the over-articulated hands could be a really good thing and a nice way to bump up the value of this thing. So I think from an engineering standpoint, while, yeah, you don't have like 8 figures worth of articulation here, because again, you can only do so much articulation in an action figure. Even a 2-foot tall action figure, you can only do so much articulation before the thing just doesn't even stand up. But I think in general, I would say for the price point and for what it is, I would say that it is worth what they have put into it for that $199.99 price point. So then we got to look at competition, right? What are other comparably priced and or sized figures out there on the market? And the 2 big ones are going to be things like Hot Toys and things like NECA's, what is it, the 1/4 scale figures. And when you look at some of these larger figures, and Hot Toys are only 12-inch, not 24-inch like the HASLAB is, and you look at the articulation there, there's a lot of similarities there. Now, I will say when it comes to Hot Toys, their sculpt and their molds is much better than what we see with this Giant Man. Now they do focus more on realistic stuff, more MCU characters as opposed to comic characters, things like that. So they go for that more realistic look, but the price point shows that. I mean, most Hot Toys are well above $200. You can find some closer to that $200 mark, but usually for a 12-inch tall, figure, from Hot Toys, you're going to pay far more than you would pay for this 2-foot tall Giant Man. And then same thing going back with the NECA, like 1/4 scale figures that they put out, these larger figures. And I think they have some even larger than that. Very, very nice figures, great looking figures, but they're also very, very expensive. And then if you just look at other figures out there in the market that come close to that $200 price point, there's some higher end, import figures, some of these, I believe there's a couple of figures out there from Storm Collectibles that push that $200 mark, and several other companies out there have figures that get close to that $200 mark. Now these of course are not 2-foot tall figures, so you're not getting the same amount of plastic that you would get with this Giant Man figure, but still you're getting really good figures for that $200 price point. So how does this compare to all those other figures out there on the market in and around that price point or in and around that size? And I think it compares really, really well. You're getting a 2-foot tall figure with good articulation and is very comic accurate, even if it's not the most detailed figure out there, like a Hot Toys. Very, very comic book accurate, looks good. So I say all in all, yeah, it's probably worth the $200 price point. Then we get to the thing that's going to be more subjective and really is going to be up to you. And that's collection value. Where does this fall for you? Is this something you need or want? Does this fit in with your collection, right? Even if you collect Marvel Legends, do you have an Avengers display for this thing to go in? Because he's huge, and just him on the shelf by himself is not going to look great because he's not really like a main leader character. It's not like Galactus on the shelf, right? You need the other Avengers there to make this guy look good, and preferably you need their kind of more traditional classic looks to go with him. If you're going to invest $200 into him, you want to make sure you have the rest of the team as well. And whether you already have them or you have to go buy them afterwards, whatever it is, does this fit into your collection? The other thing, which I think is pretty obvious, is space. This is huge. This is 2 feet tall. Do you have shelf space to put this guy in your collection? Something you need to take into consideration. So there's a lot of kind of aspects to this that I think play into more of the personal preference thing and whatever your personal collection calls for. For some people, this is going to work really well. For others, it's not. And the other thing to take into consideration is, do you already have, let's say, the old school Build-A-Figure Giant Man, which, while, not this big or this grandiose, was still a really nice figure. Now, to keep in mind what we're dealing with here, the old Giant Man figure also, at least used to, cost around $200. So if it's kind of a comparison there of, hey, can you go pick up the other one for cheaper? Not really. I mean, I'm sure the prices have come down a little bit, but last time I looked, which was just a week ago, that 12-inch version of Giant Man, the Build-A-Figure, from way back in the day, was still going for at least $150. Is this new one at only $50 more worth it? And again, I would say, if that's what you're basing this on, the answer is yes. So again, to come at this from just kind of a non-biased perspective, as somebody who might not even pick the thing up and doesn't have a stake in Hasbro or crowdfunding or anything else, I think in general, the HASLAB is worth it. I think in general, you are getting your money's worth out of this thing. And maybe I decide this is the first HASLAB I want to pick up. Maybe I don't. Either way, I just wanted to kind of take an unbiased look at this and see whether or not I think in this particular case, is this Giant Man figure worth it? And I think for most people, for most Marvel Legends collectors, it probably is.